If you are just joining us, thank you so much. We're asking you to respond in the chat with your first name, your region, and the question for this morning is, what is the biggest challenge families face with respect to attendance? Just want to give a shout out to our partners this morning. The Carolina Family Engagement Center, CFEC, is in the house. We are so thankful for their partnership and all of their talents and expertise that they bring to the table. So the CFEC team is here this morning. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next slide. Your co-hosts for today's session, yours truly, Regina Thurman, also Karen Utters from Carolina Family Engagement Center. Karen, would you like to say hello to our attendees this morning?
Hello, everyone. Welcome from the Carolina Family Engagement Center.
Also joining us, we have a guest presenter, my colleague, Aveen Coleman. You all will meet her later this morning. We are so very fortunate to have her this morning to bring all of this great information around attendance. She is truly our go-to. She is an expert in from the field. Next slide. Our agenda is pretty tight. As you can see, we're going to take a look. We're going to do this deep dive around attendance and absenteeism, chronic absenteeism and its impact. We're going to allow for our presenter to come forth, and then there will be a question and answer with Ms. Coleman. Of course, as you all can see on the agenda, again, the South Carolina K-12 framework. We're going to look at that. The breakout session, which is a big hit, so you'll have a chance to interface with one another. And of course, you know, I value the takeaways and any questions that you may have, and we'll share our contact information and upcoming events and resources. We have a ton of resources available for you. Our objectives for today, as you can see as outlined, this is an opportunity definitely for reflection. We're asking that you consider the relevance of the South Carolina framework and how the 5 strategies may reduce absenteeism. You're going to have the opportunity to share, is our objective, strategies from partnering with parents to improve attendance. And last but not least, we're going to provide you with statewide attendance data around the absenteeism, truancy, and compare data-wise. Next slide. Want to go ahead and kick off our morning. Our purpose, our time together is an opportunity for us to do this deep dive.
Okay.
As you enter, please make sure you mute your mics. Mute your mics if you're not muted. So we know that we are now well into the second semester, 25 days into the new year. And this is a good time for a fresh start, a check-in, a check-up. And so we know that attendance is very important, and whether it's excused or unexcused absent, anytime a student misses days from school, they're at risk of academic failure. And so our question to you and today's session is, what strategies, what are you doing? And what do you need to do to maybe improve upon some of what you're already doing? And you'll have a chance to share that. As I said earlier, we're very fortunate to have Mrs. Aveen Coleman with us this morning. She is one of the attendance experts here at the State Department of Education. She has conducted numerous trainings across the state in districts and schools. And so without further ado, I'm going to allow Ms. Coleman to come on and present her presentation and say anything to our folks this morning, our attendees, that you would like to share. Ms. Coleman, next slide.
Good morning. Thank you, Regina, and thank you for allowing me to share the information regarding attendance today with your team. We are always glad to support you and partner with you to help support families and students to make sure that they're back in school attending, and if they're not, getting those services that they do need to be successful. So why is school attendance important? First of all, better grades. The students who attend, based on the research, they receive better grades. A high school diploma. Based on our state guidelines, students must be in attendance in order to meet those seat time requirements in order to get that high school diploma. College opportunities. When you're attending every day, you earn your high school diploma, you get the grade, you can go on to college. And then those workplace skills. It is very important that the students who leave our schools are prepared for the workforce, college or career ready. That's our ultimate goal, is to make sure that those students are ready. And attendance at work is a very important part of that. Next slide. So what does present mean? Based on our federal rule, a student must be in attendance at least 50% of the school day. That varies at each school. We ask parents to make sure that they've reached out to the attendance clerk at their school. They can tell you what 50% of the school day is for that school, because it does vary. It's based on the start time. But overall, schools operate in South Carolina 6 hours minimum. The high school a little bit longer, but 6 hours is the minimum. So students have to be in at least 3 hours of the day, but that does vary based on the start time and end time of that school. Next slide. So based on the research, how does attendance impact your students' overall academic performance? Lower standardized test score. It's been proven again and again, when students miss too many days of school, they're missing valuable instructional time, and they tend to have lower test scores, even lower grade point averages. Some of the things that we worked with the National Dropout Prevention Center years ago is looking at students who are failing English and who are failing math, and look at their GPAs as it relates to that. And those are some criteria to help identify your students that may be at risk to dropping out, along with their attendance. Those students who are not attending also have high retention rates. And the reason why is because they are not there. They're not receiving the instruction, so they are not passing the courses. And so they're either repeating courses or actually failing and dropping out. Attendance is the #1 indicator out of all indicators to identify students that are dropping out, because if they are not there, they're not getting the tools they need to be successful. They're not gaining knowledge. The students are falling behind. And if you look at their attendance and you look at their actual grades, you can see that gap there. So attendance is very important, that we partner with our families and students to get them back in school and back on track. Next slide. So when we had this conversation with parents a couple weeks ago, we wanted to emphasize that knowledge is power. Understanding the basic rules of attendance is very powerful, so that when the school contacts them regarding attendance, they understand that there are some laws and regulations that must be followed. Next slide. So our first law that is set by our General Assembly is our Compulsory Attendance Law. When you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to click directly at to that law. The second one is our state board regulation, which is regulation 43-274. That goes over truancy, unexcused and excused absences, what happens for the intervention plan. And we'll go into more detail. And then the third set of laws is your actual school board policies, or your district and school board additional rules. The school board sets the policies, and then when you go to your school, there is a lovely student handbook, and it has information on attendance, what is counted present, what is counted absent, and it's usually aligned to the regulation 43-274, but they do provide additional clarification. How many notes are accepted, parent notes, medical notes, when that information should be submitted. All that is inside of that student's handbook. So we want you to make sure that your parents are aware of that policy and probably provide them that information when you're speaking with them if they have a student that is struggling with attendance. Next slide. So let's go into the Compulsory Attendance Law. The Compulsory Attendance Law states in so many words that students must be in school. They must be either in a public school, and that is the traditional school, or charter school, and a virtual school. Those are public school programs, just different instructional models. Or they must be in a private school or homeschool. Parents are not just allowed to not have their students in school. We know that we're struggling with COVID. We know that we have some issues based on attendance because students are out in quarantine, but students must be in school. Based on the state law, they must be in school if their birthday, if they're 5, before September 1, until they're 17, or until they graduate. Our goal is to keep kids in school until they graduate, because we want them to be career and college ready. So if parents ask why students must be in school, please make sure you refer them to the Compulsory Attendance Law that is set by our General Assembly. Next slide. So let's talk about our other 2 guidelines and principles as we talk about chronically absent students and truant students. What's the difference between those 2, and how do we define them? With a chronically absent student, it covers from grades K through 12. There's no age exemptions for chronic absenteeism. If that student missed 50% or more of their instructional day, which is 10% of their enrollment. What does 10% of their enrollment looks like for the state of South Carolina? For the state of South Carolina, students are enrolled in school for 180 days. So 10% of that is 18 days. So if that student misses 18 days or more, that student is considered chronically absent. So what absences are considered for that? You have excused absences, unexcused absences, and suspensions. What's the difference than calling these students truant? Because chronic absenteeism is looking at the amount of instructional time lost. Yes, you can have an excused absent for medical or bereavement or something else that's excused, but it's looking overall at how much instructional time is this child losing that they really need? And if they are losing this time, what additional support can we provide them in case we can recover this time? And in some cases, we've learned over the years that some parents are not aware of all the medical homebound situations that students may need if they have a serious medical issue. But in order for us to make sure that they get those tools and services they need, we have to have that conversation with those parents and students. So suspensions are also included here because it looks at the amount of days a student is being suspended. And if they're being suspended 18, 20 days out of the year, they're still losing instructional time. So meaning that a student must be present at least 50% of that school day in order not to be counted as chronically absent. If they attend less than 50%, that is 1 day towards chronically absent. But remember that you must get to 18 based on your enrollment. Now we have some other cases, since I am talking to school level personnel, it is based on your enrollment. So if I'm enrolled in a school for 60 days, 10% of that is 6. Because I'm talking with school folks, I like to clarify that a little more because some kids move a lot. We do have students that are highly transit and they may be in more than one school during that school year, and they could be counted chronically absent in different schools. So we want to make sure that we understand that we have our whole percentage if they're in one school for that entire year, which is that 180 days times 10, and that's 18 days. But if they move to multiple school settings during the school year, it is 10% of their enrollment at that school setting. So let's talk about truancy. With truancy, we want to make sure that we understand that truancy is unexcused absences only, and it's full days, and it only impacts students ages 6 to 17. And there are two main considerations for truancy. It has to be unexcused 3 consecutive days in a row, meaning Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's 3 consecutive. Unexcused, meaning all classes are marked unexcused absences. The student did not show up at all, and then that's truancy. Or you can have a total of 5 unexcused absences, and that could be 2 days, 1 week, that's Monday and Tuesday, 1 week. And then the next week, it could be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But all of those days have to be full unexcused absences. The student did not show up, did not have a legitimate parent note, did not have a medical note, did not have a legal note. They just missed school. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that, because there are 2 different things when we're looking at chronically absent and truant students. And for truancy, we do not count suspensions for truancy. We only count unexcused absences. The next slide, please. So what is considered lawful absence? A lawful absence is when a student is out because he or she is sick. Also, when a family member is sick or they have death in the family. Also, if there is a recognized religious holiday of that student's faith, that is also considered an excused absence. And then there are absences that are pre-approved by the principal. And with that being said, the absences pre-approved by the principal usually provides, the parent has to send a letter to the principal to get that approved prior to. Are all things approved when they're sent to the principal? No. The principals tend to use what's under the excuse. You have to look at your district policy. I've reviewed some policies. They tell you what can be excused. So it's very important that while you're working with families and parents, that you pull up your district policy or whatever school you're working with, that policy, so that you're aware of what are acceptable excuses. All districts require parents to submit parent notes. I don't have any that don't have them submitting parent notes. They may have different formats, but if it's a parent note that's going to be excused, it must be in writing. Most of them, except the medical notes that are in writing, you have to submit that note. They just don't use hearsay. They like to keep that as a part of their documentation. So you do need to get a copy of that medical note, and the parent will need to submit that, or the student will need to turn that into the front office or whatever the procedures are. But please make sure when you're talking with families that you know what the procedures are at the school level that you're working with, because it does differ based on elementary, middle, and high school level, because each one of them have different kind of requirements. Once you get to high school, there are seat time requirements, and it's so important that parents get those notes in. Medical, parent notes, legal notes, all of those additional notes, bereavement, usually they take parent notes for that, or additional documentation. We want to make sure that we're giving parents the actual information they need to make sure that they are providing documentation that will be excused, and also making sure that they understand what unexcused looks like as well. Next slide. So as we talk about unexcused, we say absence of a student without the knowledge of his or her parent, or absent of a student without acceptable cause with the knowledge of his or her parent. And so I remind districts and parents all the time that all parent notes are not excused parent notes. We do have parent notes that will be unexcused. I can give a couple examples. If you look in your handbook, you'll see that some districts say vacations are unexcused absences, and you will see that inside the handbook. So if you know that you want to go to Disney, you automatically know that that's an unexcused absent if you look in the handbook. Even if you look on the district's website, you can also see where that's an unexcused absent. So please make sure that you're informing your parents of the policies that are in your school's handbook and your district, and aligned to your district policy. It's very important that parents get that accurate information. So when they contact the school, they're already aware that, oh, that's going to be an unexcused absent, even though they were with me. It wasn't one of the ones that fits under the category of excused. Next slide. So as we talk about our chronic absenteeism data, we wanted to make sure we covered the information with you, because our numbers, we know that we have COVID going on, but we've also provided opportunities for districts to support students when they're out on COVID. So if the child's out on COVID, feeling well, asymptomatic, most districts have a procedure where the kid logs in, get their work from Google Classroom, Canvas, all the different systems that you have out there. And for them to get those assignments, they turn them in. Those students are marked SCBTP, which is present. So students do have the opportunity to actually continue learning during that time. Some districts provided packets for students during that time. Some districts provide some additional support during that time while they're out with COVID. Please make sure that you're aware of what your district is doing, and make sure parents are aware that every district is doing something for students who are out, who can participate in instruction. Usually that is sent out once you've notified the nurse or whatever process that is in place in your district or in that school. Please make sure parents are aware that you just can't self-quarantine without notifying the school, so that they can get with the nurse, and then they can make sure the student gets the proper services and follow the next steps. We don't want kids out there without getting some educational support if they can. If they're too sick to participate in that instruction during that time, we understand that as well. And the school will provide that work when the student returns. But each school in the state of South Carolina has some procedure on how to handle students who can do work while they're out and students who can't do work while they're out. But we need to make sure that we're informing parents of those procedures. So we had this discussion with the parents to make them understand that even though we have COVID, our numbers are steadily inclining. It's not decreasing. Even before COVID, our numbers, they were a little less, but we're still in that 100,000 mark. And our goal is to make sure we're supporting kids and making sure they are in school, learning, engaging, being prepared for the workplace, being prepared for college. Our goal is to make sure that students are attending school. So you see here, we had about 167,448 students reported during the 2020-21 school year. The year before that was when everybody closed. So you see that asterisk there, because that's the year when everybody closed in March. And we stopped taking attendance formally, and everybody was marked present. So you see that sharp decline, but our normal numbers are in 100,000 mark. And we want to make sure that we're looking at strategies, additional interventions, and things that will support families to help kids stay in school and to also keep them attending and engaged in school. Next slide. So what I did here, this is one of my new slides for 2020-21 school data, where it shows chronic absenteeism and truancy. If you look at the orange line here, you see truancy tends to decline as the students get older. And some of that is because the courts don't take anything past 17. But if you look at our chronic absenteeism numbers, you see a slight decline, but it's still much higher at those grade levels. So, and overall, we want to be looking at attendance. You see that intersection at the 5th grade there, where truancy and chronic absenteeism levels are about the same. And then once you leave the 5th grade and you have that transitional year, you see that chronic absenteeism numbers keep rising. And our 9th grade population for truancy and chronic absenteeism are higher in most of our grade levels as well. For 9th grade, it's a very crucial point that we look at those students to see what services, and to me, it's always because 9th grade is when you must attend, and it does impact your high school credit, that we provide additional support, additional information to parents so that they can understand why it's so important that kids are in school throughout all grade levels, but once they hit 9th grade, it is so important. And for 8th graders that are taking high school credit, an additional part that we have to emphasize to parents as well. So it's very important. But you see here that our chronic absenteeism numbers are much higher than our truancy numbers for that school year. To me, both are high. They're too high overall. Next slide. So what type of interventions that we've seen over the years with that school districts have implemented? Home visits. We have a lot of districts, if they have social workers, they go out to do home visits. You make sure you're following your district procedures for those home visits to make sure that you're safe. Calling students when they're absent. All districts have a system in which they can call students when they're out to provide that notification and notify the family. If you haven't informed parents of Parent Portal, attendance is also in there in Parent Portal for Power School. So make sure all your families have access to Parent Portal. They can download the app. They can actually log into a computer and get that information, an iPad as well. So make sure that they're aware of that resource. Also, conducting workshops for families regarding attendance. We have, as the parent liaison in your district, you've probably conducted some, but we've also had our attendance clerk go to each grade level, especially at the middle and high school, do actual training for those students to say, hey, this is excused, this is what unexcused is, this is what we need for you to turn in, that medical note, parent note, and also explain to them about seat time. So we've had a couple districts to do that as well. That was student geared. Counseling, either referring students to counseling, providing additional counseling support services at the school level. Personalized learning. Some districts have added students to a virtual program if it wasn't working out. And then some districts had to remove them from a virtual program because it wasn't working out. So that personalized learning, just looking at what the student needs and what they're having problems with and providing them the additional support. Check and Connect is a little more intense. It provides that one-on-one support. We call that the tier 3 support when we're talking about truancy interventions, because that student has someone that's checking on them every day. And if they're not there, that person from the school level is calling. Mentoring, assigning a student a mentor. So if they're having other issues, that they can have someone to talk to or someone just to follow up with them and keep them on the path. Providing tutoring, because some kids are struggling with subject matters and sometimes they don't always ask for help, but providing that service and referring them to that service helps. Personalized outreach to families. And that starts with giving them that information up front, reaching out to families who are struggling with language barriers to make sure that materials are translated where they can understand, explaining those policies to parents directly, meeting with them, seeing what their needs are, providing or referring them to additional resources that are outside of the school setting. And we appreciate our social workers for that because they really assisted our attendance clerks and attendance supervisors, and some serve both roles, but we do appreciate that. And monitoring attendance. If we don't know what the attendance is for a student, we can't provide services. So we have to make sure attendance is taken every day. We're monitoring, we're making sure we're following up with those students that we have interventions and supports for. And if they're falling through the crack, that we make sure that we intervene earlier and not wait until they have 40, 50, or 60 days missed. Next slide. So we believe that we can reduce chronic absenteeism if we provide that support, those wraparound services, those tutoring services, mentoring, additional support. We eliminate some of those barriers, which could be transportation barriers, families not knowing how to get to resources, making sure students are getting mental health services that they need, looking at those barriers to their enrollment. But the only way to figure those out is when we connect with the families, the students, and the school. That connection, that partnership is valuable. We need that. We know that COVID has made that connection a little strained, but we can use our Zoom, we can use our Microsoft Teams, we can use any platform to still kind of reach out and connect with those families and follow up and meet with them, probably a little more than what we did prior to COVID, because it'll be easier to schedule that meeting when a parent is off from work, if they can just log in by their phone. So that's also a great thing that we have technology that we can use different platforms instead of just meeting at the building. So that's been a plus for us all. Next slide. So as we continue to look at attendance and want to look at supporting families and schools and reducing chronic absenteeism, reducing truancy, increasing attendance, increasing graduation rates, reducing dropout rates, we have a few upcoming opportunities. If you have not registered, please register for our Problems of Practice. I'm going to send out something to Regina so she can send it out to you. You can send a scenario to Attendance Works at the Problems of Practice session. That's our next one. We had the other one on January 20th, but I do have the recording of that session. If you would like, you can send me an email at acoleman@ed.sc.gov and we can send that to you. But we would love to have you there at our February 3rd session so that you can send in a problem or a concern that you're having with attendance, and I'll send you that form for you to send that in. And then you can listen to the team help you work through that problem. Our last session with the National Dropout Prevention Center is February 16th, but we'll be restarting that learning loss recovery series after this one, but we don't mind you joining that last session for that content. And we do have that information recorded because it was 6 webinars for that one. So if you click at the bottom link, you will be able to register for any of these sessions. We hope that you will join us. We would love to have the parent liaison's voice as we address attendance issues, as well as providing interventions for students and families. Next slide. We also included some resources. There's the Truancy guide. It's a pretty detailed document. Hopefully we'll get it updated in the next, by next year, but it's a guide that provides additional information. And then there's some additional strategies for improving attendance and reducing chronic absenteeism and engaging students. Based on COVID, we still have schools that go remote, and we want to make sure that you're still aware of some strategies to support those students as we do continue remote learnings at times when COVID is too high in certain areas. And I believe that's the last slide. And then there are questions that you could put in the chat to ask me.
Thank you
Regina?
so much, Aveen, for all of that information, just a wealth of information. Thank you. So as our presenter has invited you to either put your questions in the chat, or you may unmute and ask your questions. Are there any questions for Ms. Coleman at this time? Practice my wait time. Karen, I turn it over to you.
All righty. Thank you. And thank you, Aveen, for that great information. We can go to the next slide, Julia. So we want to get you to your breakout rooms, but before we do that, I just want to very briefly touch on the South Carolina K-12 framework for family engagement. We want to try and do this every time we meet, just to give you a flavor for how this document can become a living document and how you can use it in your practice. So obviously, when we look at the 5 components of the framework, nothing in there says attendance. But clearly, when you are working with families to build their knowledge about what attendance rules are, to build their skills in, for example, monitoring their child's attendance using Power School, or working on them with problem solving in terms of the specific challenge they may have, you are linking your family engagement to learning outcomes, because as Aveen mentioned at the outset, attendance is so critical to learning outcomes. So when we talk about linking to learning outcomes, we're not just talking about things that are directly linked like literacy, math, science, but some of these other areas that are so closely linked to academic achievement. And then just thinking around the circle, how we do our family engagement, thinking about, for example, the importance of relationships, the relationships we have with individual families when we talk to them about attendance issues, and those can be sometimes difficult issues to talk about, how that continuous work in building relationships can really aid your work in engaging a family around this issue. Communication, how are we communicating with our families? Are we communicating accurate information frequently enough? Are we communicating about in a positive way? In other words, are we always talking about the negative consequences and not talking about, in a positive vein, the importance of and the benefits of attendance? Are we translating or interpreting that information for those families who are not fluent in English? Thinking about collaborative practices, that might include things like, are you connected, or in your school, are you connected as a parent and family engagement specialist with the attendance clerk and with the social worker and all the folks who have some hand on what's going on with attendance? Are you all working together collaboratively around that? Are you working collaboratively with families in terms of hearing what their needs are and coming up with co-designed solutions to some of the attendance problems that are out there? And then community partnerships, thinking about, and again, this depends on the needs of your school and your families, but are there ways that we can reach out to the community and gain support for what we're trying to do and trying to improve attendance? Are there resources out there that are going to help us with our particular goals or help our particular families with challenges that they're facing around attendance? So just a quick overview of that framework to think about, how does this apply in the context we're talking about today? And so I would encourage you to use that, to think through that as a way of organizing your work around engaging families in attendance. So next slide, Julia. So we're going to head to the breakout rooms. In response to evaluation feedback that we got, we're going to extend our time today until 12:15 instead of, we normally break at noon. So the breakout rooms will run from now until about 5 after 12. And we've got some discussion questions that you will have a facilitator in your group to talk through. And I would encourage you to share your challenges as well as your strategies for success. We saw at the outset of when you all were putting information in the chat, clearly COVID is at the top of the list in terms of current challenges with attendance. And, there's just so many different aspects of that, families not knowing what's required during quarantine in terms of what their children need to do to be marked present, unexpected or last minute changes, going from virtual to in-person. Transportation was also raised, parents having to work and leaving their kids at home when they're on virtual learning and not having that supervision to ensure that they're on task. And then someone else mentioned consistency in communication and resources as being a particular challenge. So those are some of the things that you all brought up in the chat. So I hope that will give you a jumping off point as you go into your breakout rooms and share with each other the strategies that you have found helpful, and maybe talking through how you might be able to collaborate more closely with some of the other folks in your school community on this issue. So with that, we can go, whoever hits the magic button, I think that's Teresa, to send us to breakout, that would be great.
We're all back. I think that we're all back together in the main room, and we are at the point of talking about takeaways and questions. And so we invite you to please share any thoughts, any comments, any conclusions, impressions, or action points from your time together in the breakout room. I was with a really good, awesome group. And so lots of great comments there. Anyone care to share?
Miss Regina, this is Lauren. I'll share.
Yes.
In our breakout room, one of the, it was the first question we answered, and I can't remember verbatim, but I think it was what we have in place to help with absenteeism. We have an attendance link that the social worker or social work department put together, and it's located on our school's website as well, where parents can upload doctor excuses or parent notes, and it will go directly to the social worker and the database specialist at the school. So that has been proven to be very beneficial in getting excuses. And then also with that, when we email the parents the link, we also email the attendance brochure that gives them the information on what is considered, excused and unexcused and tardy and things of that nature.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're inviting you to share any takeaways. Lots of great information shared in our breakout room. How are we doing on time? We're right at 12:08. So if you would like to share, this is not share or die, but if there's anything that you would like to share, we definitely appreciate it.
Regina, I'll just say our group, I wish we had more time because we ran out of time as we normally do. But I loved hearing Sylvia mentioned that they hold an attendance awareness week at one of their schools, and that they've started implementing having the parents of kindergarten students at orientation sign an attendance contract. So setting them up for success right from the get-go.
Yes.
And we also, she also shared about having the parent notes available, the forms right there on the school website, so that it makes it a lot more convenient.
Thank you, Gina, for that.
Sure.
Anyone else care to share? We're doing great on time. We have a few minutes.
I was just going to share, this is Lorraine. One point that Michelle brought up in our group was that not only are they holding virtual sessions to connect to parents about attendance, in which they invite the nurse, the school nurse, to help provide some insight there and address concerns. They also, because they noticed that many parents are in the pickup line for students at the end of the day, so they're doing more curbside or drive-by events as well, to sort of connect with parents in a way that that was very natural to what parents are already doing to connect to school. So I thought that was really great to share.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Any other comments? We have about 5 minutes left. Any other burning comments, impressions, conclusions, takeaways? I love the question number 4, ask about your challenges, and a lot of great feedback in our group as well from that. Would anyone like to share? Specific challenges was the questions that you're facing. A really good point was made in our group.
Regina, I'll share. So one of the, this is Clarissa.
Yes,
one of the
hi.
things that were talked about in our group is just being consistent across the board, because sometimes we've seen where when we talk about AIPs, they'll have a sibling that doesn't have an AIP, but the brother has one. And just being consistent when it comes to how the schools are taking attendance, because everybody's not taking attendance.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Clarissa. Thank you. Any other comments? I see in the chat, we have comments there. Great conversation in the breakout rooms. Learned so much from the family engagement specialists. I encourage my group to share, and thanks for your patience with my connectivity. Okay, thank you for that. I'm filling in for our attendance clerk, and I have learned so much. I have heard some great ideas I can't wait to do. Thank you so much for this presentation. And with that being said, we're right at 12:12. We're going to share out this information. So you're going to get the comments that have been shared from the breakout rooms. Let's move on to the next slide if we can. Okay, so here's our contact information. Ms. Aveen Coleman, who was with us today and provided us with a wealth of information. Thank you, Aveen. Karen Utter, the director of Carolina Family Engagement Center, and yours truly, Regina Thurman. Next slide. And of course, we could not do this work without the whole entire CFEC team, our regional coordinators. Many of them were in the breakout rooms with you. Next slide. And so, as I said earlier, a wealth of information, and here are some additional resources that we will send out to you. This information, we're going to send you the PowerPoint slide, and you will be able to access this information from the Power slide. So here is one. Lorianne, would you like to talk about this? Would you like to share, speak on?
Sure, yeah. So as we did last time, we put together a resource toolkit for educators in schools. And this is one of the pages that will be included from a recent webinar that had some resources for parents and families. So you'll receive that toolkit sometime after this meeting. I'm assuming by the end of the week, and I'll be sure to send that over to you, Regina.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as we said, a ton of resources. Next slide. So if you were able to attend the training that we had, the webinar that we had, the attendance webinar for the parents on the 13th of January, Aveen was again our presenter, did a phenomenal job. That information is now available. The recording is available. So, and it tells you how to access that from the CFEC, the Carolina Family Engagement Center website. Also, we have some literacy information from the Dollar General that you will get. Next slide. Yay, the regionals are just around the corner. We're gonna do provide regional trainings. We're partnershiping with Carolina Family Engagement Center, again, CFEC. And so that information, this information is available, and the details, we're still trying to flesh out We do know we landed in the month of March, and what you need to know is that we will not host a roundtable in the month of March because we're going to bring to you your region tailored just for you, the regional trainings. And so that will take place upstate, low country, PD, Midlands, look out, we're coming. Next slide. Additional information here from the Behavioral Alliance of South Carolina. Their newsletter is loaded with information and you will have access to the link on that. Next slide. Of course, we thank you so much for joining us and we invite you to, the link is in the chat, to provide us with your feedback. This is how we grow. This is how we come up with our topics. This is how we support you out in the field. So please, 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 I'm begging you, please provide us with the feedback. Let's see. Anything else, Karen, Aveen, CFEC team, that we would like to say and share this information, all of this information from the PowerPoint, the information that Aveen shared, the resources, the training, the upcoming trainings, you will receive that. Is there anything else, Karen?
Just that for those folks who might be interested in holding a session for their families, similar to the one we did on the state level, you can again access that Aveen's presentation that was tailored for families on our website. And I could see using that as a foundational piece and then maybe having that was set up as a information and then question and answer. You know, if you want to take that video with Aveen's portion and then have your own local or school level question and answer session, that might be a great way of connecting with your families. And so I encourage you to check that resource out.
So we're right at 12:16. Are there any other questions, comments? We thank you so much for joining us. And as we said, our next session will the next event for us will be the Roundtable Regionals, and we will send that information out to you once we identify our dates. Okay, and it will be held virtually. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to reconnecting with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty.